Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for those of you who have participated this full day in Technology Tuesday. We definitely look forward to be able to be a part of Innovation Week every year. So those of you who have joined us for the whole day, thank you again for joining. Our last session of the day, I know, has been highly anticipated. I'm going to hand it over to our Director of Strategy and Architecture for Innovation Idea Explosion. So without further ado, Mr. Andrew Olson.
Appreciate that, Kennedy. Thanks for the intro. Kennedy and her colleague, Art Intelligence, also created this awesome image based on very little information from my side, other than I had come up with this idea that I called Innovation Idea Explosion. When Josh and Kennedy asked me to do a talk on innovation, I wasn't really sure what I was going to talk about. And then I remembered that I've worked a long time in a galaxy far, far away sometimes. And I've got all these random ideas and these random concepts that I've heard from podcasts and from YouTube and from talking to random people. So I've got this smorgasbord of random knowledge, and I just thought this would be a good opportunity to maybe share some of it. You don't really get it's really hard to get that out sometimes. And so Innovation Idea Explosion came out, the idea, and then there was like a blurb for what this talk was. Kennedy shared it with me. I told her that was over-promising what we're getting today. One of the things is I think people confuse innovation ideas as giant leaps from A to Z, where in reality innovation is A to B, B to C, D to E, right? It's these small steps that get you from one to the other. And so today, instead of real big innovative ideas, I'm going to give you a rapid fire fortune cookies of knowledge. Okay. I have 12 knowledge cookies that I'm going to try to share with you today. Some of them you may know already. Some of them are going to be brand new. I hope at least one of them is informative and you can sit through the rest. The 12 are the 99-1 rule. This one I learned a long time ago. Priority versus time. Decks done right. This has to do with doing presentation decks correctly. I also have a whole side episodes on how to do meetings and invites. So if you want to do that later, let me know. Pick the right tool, which kind of sounds obvious and probably pretty is, but I think there's a lot of truth there. Planning is important. I want to highlight that one in particular because it leads to the next one, the exponential cost of a defect, right? So the cause of not planning can be an exponentially painful process. The idea of a pre-mortem. You've probably heard of postmortems. I don't know if you've ever heard of a pre-mortem, right? This is an idea I heard about several years ago of how to try to figure out a problem before it happens. CalPath, good or bad? We'll talk about that. Listening is a skill. As I was reviewing this this morning, I realized this probably should have gone first, but we'll talk about listening as a skill. Free tuition. Again, I can't remember who gave me this idea, but I really like it as a frame of mind. It's really hard to Google this concept and get the right answer, so I'm going to spread that truth for you. Smaller, more frequent, and then the last one, which I learned a few months ago, the concept of pluralistic ignorance. All right, those are the cookies we're going to go through today. It should take about 30 minutes, and hopefully we'll hit you in the face with something interesting. All right, cookie number 1, 99-1. Okay, what does that mean? 99-1 is the concept that if you get a random group of 100 people together, one of those people is going to be a creator, a change maker, push the envelope. 9 people in that group are going to want to participate in that activity, that change, but they're not going to go out there and give you that idea. They're not going to push the envelope, but they definitely want to participate and contribute. And a vast majority of people within that 100 group, they're lurkers, right? They are going to watch, they're going to pay attention. If you ask them to do something, they potentially will, and they're not going to volunteer. As Josh knows, when he asked for questions during Malia's live, there weren't a whole lot of hands that went up, right? And that's reality is there probably wasn't one of the one in that group that wanted to do that. I figured out this concept back when I was working as a consultant 12, 13 years ago, and we had all our consultants in different teams, and I wanted to create a community where we all could kind of communicate. Well, Slack had just come out. So I created a Slack site, invited everyone from our office, put all these channels out there. Hey, what do you like for lunch? What are you watching on TV? Technology stuff, Aggie football, all sorts of stuff to just create content that you would have around the water cooler, but we're not next to each other, right? And I got really frustrated because I would put ideas out there and a few people would comment, Josh, and then a whole bunch of people would not. They just were just not participating at all. I got really mad. So I'm like, we're trying to build this community. The least you could do is just give a thought out there. And I ran up to this concept and I realized, oh, they're in the lurker group. And what I would end up doing is I would disconnect them from the app. And then they would call me up and be like, hey, I can't log in anymore. So they were participating. They just weren't participating. And so it made me feel better to learn about this concept. Someone calls it the participation inequality. But what I've done personally with myself is I realize depending on the topic, I may be inherently in one of these three groups. In some topics, I'm the 1%. You asked me to do an Innovation Week talk? Sure, why not? I could come up with something random. Other things, I might be in the 9%. And I'm like, oh, I'll contribute, I want to do it. But no one is in the 1%, maybe I should volunteer. And there's a lot of times I'm in the lurker because I really just don't want to have the energy for that. And maybe I'll be like, okay, let me push myself into the 9%. So 99.1, something to think about. That's cookie number one. Cookie number two, priority versus time. How many times a day do you say, I don't have time for that? In your life, at work, at home, anywhere. What if instead of I don't have time for that, you said, I don't have time for that? Instead of that, you said, it's not a priority. All right, does that change your mentality for how you responded to not doing that activity, right? So I got a little exercise for you. Don't do it right now because I got 10 other cookies I want to go through. But at some point, if you want to in the future, write down your personal top 5, 10 priorities, however many you want. And then for 1 week, track all your time, 24 hours a day. Sleep, work, family. And then when you're done with the week, evaluate your priorities that you wrote down versus the time you allocated to those priorities, right? And what you'll find out at the end of the day is either I'm lined up perfectly and I'm kicking butt, or my priorities are wrong, or my time management is wrong. And so maybe it's an evaluation. I think it's a little bit of both typically. I think people misinterpret their priorities and they're like, oh, I really want to do this. And in reality, when it comes down to it, they decide differently. I did one myself. So I wrote down my priorities, theoretically. So my top priority, family first, always, right? Then I want to be healthy. I want to exercise. I want to get 8 hours of sleep. I want to eat some good food. And then I'm definitely dedicated to my job. I got to work on that presentation for Innovation Week. And then obviously Aggie football's got to fit in there pretty high. And at some point I got to fix the toilet that's been broken for a while. I got to get into that honey-do list. Well, then I spent a whole week and I tracked my time. In reality, I mostly did work. Then somehow I found time to watch a lot of Netflix. Josh can tell me this, right? The Aggie football actually rose in priority, as it should. And then I did see my family a little bit, but I ran out of time to eat and exercise right, and I didn't get much sleep, but I did eat Chick-fil-A 4 times that week, right? So I need to reevaluate, okay, maybe that's really where I need to be. Like Netflix is really important. They got jobs there and they want my support. Or maybe I need to figure out how to reevaluate my life. This goes back to my meeting talk. Don't always go to every meeting, right? Is it a priority, right? Is it your priority? Okay. I stole some things off the internet while I was in a meeting, not paying attention. So one of those was, I thought this was really cool summation of the whole thing. Time management, which is an active thing you have to do if you want to align your priorities to your time, is about efficiently using your time to complete prioritized tasks. Not, I spent 3 hours in email or 6 hours in Jira or whatever, right? If that's your priority, right? I found this also same not paying attention meeting, looking at the internet. I found this cool kind of matrix I've never seen before. Maybe this is famous. Take your tasks that you have to do every day and throw them against this matrix. If it's important and urgent, then do it. If it's important and it's not urgent, schedule the time, but schedule it and make sure that you do it. Don't triple schedule it, right? Or you'll never do it. If it's not important, but it is urgent, it's not important to you personally, but it's urgent, delegate it to somebody else. And if it's not pertinent, it's not urgent, then just maybe don't do it at all. So I don't know where this came from, but it looked pretty interesting. I liked it. This is for your parents out there. Okay. this is gonna hurt a little bit. You spend 19 years parenting your kids. It's 18 years in a row. And then the last year is spread over the rest of your life. So prioritize. All right, cookie number 3, rolling. Decks done right. There are 2 types of PowerPoint decks. Okay. Anyone guess what they are?
Good and bad.
Nope, wrong. There's the presentation deck, which is what we're doing today. I'm presenting from this deck. And then there's the leave behind deck. Okay. A lot of people do the leave behind deck as a presentation deck, and it's not a good way to get your message across. Right. And I'll have some tidbits in a second. Right. So figure out, and it's okay on one topic to do one of each. That's totally fine. But do not present your leave behind deck. Right. I heard this in like a Stanford internet YouTube class when at one point they gave all their classes away on the internet for free. And I was like, this is cool. So here's some guidance, some guidelines for your presentation deck. It is meant to guide the audience through a topic, an idea, or a discussion, right? It is not for them to read stuff. It is for you to present something. The key to it is listening over reading, right? It should be a lot of bullets. There should be a lot of things. Really, the idea from a presentation deck is to put enough information up there to remind the presenter what to say, right? If you're reading your slides to somebody, you're boring everybody because they can just read it too. So it's really just to remind you what to say. It's to guide your thought processes. It may be hard. You may find you writing too much. And here's a good guide point. If your font goes below 30 points, you're creating a leave behind deck. Stop that. So watch the font size. And what you'll find out as you do this, you'll realize, I want to get that information in there. And what? Just take that, put it in the notes, and tell people that. Right? You still want to give them that information. You just don't want them to read it. So write points, not sentences. Again, you don't want to read them. This is what a leave behind deck should look like. It's a lot of information. The idea is I've left it behind, and I need that person to understand the content without me explaining it to them. So it's got to have a lot of words in it. Right now, half of you are reading this and not listening to me, right? But this is the idea of a leave behind deck. So as you'll see as I go through this whole presentation, hopefully I followed my own rules. I think I break it at one point, but we'll see. That's cookie number 3. Cookie of knowledge number 4, pick the right tool. All right. Who's seen the original Indiana Jones movie from 1981? Great movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Harrison Ford at his finest. There's a fantastic scene from this movie that I use this analogy all the time about picking the right tool. I didn't want to put video in here because that is complicated, and also there's the violence, and I don't want to get fired. So hopefully this is me skirting that issue. But the movie, they're in Egypt, they're in Cairo, and he's running through the market from the bad guys, and he comes up to this guy that's got this super cool looking sword, and he's whirling it around, and he's all scary, and the crowd is like, oh, what's he gonna do? This guy starts grinning like he's really gonna take Indiana Jones down. Well, so Indiana's like, oh man, I don't have a sword. What am I gonna do? Okay, oh, I got a better tool, and he shoots him with his gun, and the fight ends. Okay, never bring a knife to a gunfight, right? So the analogy here, pick the right tool, right? Evaluate your situation and pick the tool that makes the most sense to solve that problem, right? There's actually, I did some research on Wikipedia, probably in a meeting I wasn't paying attention to, about all these names of this idea of this cognitive bias of, you know, it comes down to the famous saying, if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a web developer, everything's solved by a web app. If you're a database SQL guy, everything's done in SQL. If you know how to use Cognos, everything, well, hopefully not everything's in Cognos, right? But if you've done everything on a piece of paper, then piece of paper is your favorite tool to solve all problems. But we know in technology that that's not the case. It's actually, in technology, it's called the golden hammer, which I think we should get a golden hammer and bring it to the technology floor somewhere. And this is actually referenced as an anti-pattern. It's actively to be avoided. Of don't use a familiar technology obsessively to solve every problem, right? We talk about with this with the Maximo team. Not every solution in that area should go in Maximo. Stuff like that. In the end of the day, just keep it simple. It's probably the best reference I could say. Find the simplest tool that can do the job, but also you got to think about, can it do it for the future too? So pick the right tool. Indiana Jones, go see it. All right, cookies 5 and 6, I tied together. Planning is important, exponential cost of a defect. This is a famous technology concept of whenever you find a defect in the software development lifecycle, the exponential cost of fixing that defect is obvious, right? So if I'm going in and I'm getting requirements and someone reviews the requirements and they're like, oh, you got that requirement wrong. It takes 5 seconds for me to update the requirement. If it's wrong, and then if I go to coding and I code it wrong, and now, oh, I coded this wrong and I fix it in the coding, it takes a little bit longer, but I fix it, do it in my unit test. If it gets caught in integration testing, oh, now I got to go back to the developer. Maybe I need to go do new requirements, yada, yada. If it gets all the way to production and the bug's found in production, then getting that fixed is harder and harder and harder and harder. So the sooner in the path that you can find the problem, the better, right? You build a house and there's an issue in the blueprint and you build a wall where there's not supposed to be a wall. Now we got to physically take the wall out, right? So that's a lot easier to just clean up the blueprint. So I have a personal anecdote to this. My sister Sarah can atone to this. I think she was on this trip with us. In like 2005, we went out to visit Hearst Castle. I don't know if anyone knows what this is. It's this really cool house, mansion type thing in California that William Randolph Hearst built from 1919 to 1947. It's in the middle of California. We were visiting her in Santa Barbara, and we're like, we're going to go to Hearst Castle. We're going to see this awesome house and all the cool stuff there. Well, what do we do first? Let's make a plan. Did we make a plan? Obviously made a plan, right? We had to figure out how long it was going to take to get there, how long it's going to take to get back, how long do we think it's going to take to go through the house so that we leave on the right time. Oh, do we need to bring some food, right? So we planned it out. I thought it was a good plan, right? Thought we did enough work. Google Maps actually may not have existed back then, but we definitely did as much planning as we could, right? So we got our plan. We're like, okay, this plan is great. We're going to execute this plan. We leave the house. We drive for 2.5 hours. We park. We go up to go inside Hearst Castle. I don't know if you remember this. And plan failed. Okay, how did the plan fail? Apparently you had to buy tickets ahead of time. And all the tours were booked. And we could not go that day. And so we got to get in our car and drive all the way home. So we spent 6 hours in a car and didn't get to see the castle. Right? So mission failed. Okay, so planning is important and the cost was big. Right? So I redid the chart based on my trip to the Hearst Castle. How could I have solved this problem if my plan was better? I could have checked the website. That would have took 30 seconds. Realized I needed to buy tickets and I would have bought tickets. Assuming they had a website back then, they probably did. Could have called the castle. Somebody would have answered, said, you need to buy tickets. I buy tickets. Great. That takes 5 minutes. I could have found someone who had been before and asked them. Now I got to find someone. I got to ask them. Okay, maybe that's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour to find somebody. We could have took some person from our party and sent them ahead to make sure the plan was right. They come back and they say, you got to buy tickets. All we wasted was that person's time. Instead, all of us got to drive for 3 hours and we didn't get to see the castle. We did end up going at some point, so I have seen it. It's very cool. I definitely recommend going, but definitely buy a ticket ahead of time. So this is why planning is important, because the cost can be exponentially bad if you don't. So people think they plan. I thought I planned. You got to really plan sometimes, or you're going to find defects where you don't want them. So here's a good technique for you. Pre-mortem. Anyone here heard of what a pre-mortem is? You can probably guess. Pre-mortem is a thought exercise designed to identify errors that could occur before they actually occur. This one talks about doing it before you actually build anything, but you could do it at any point. We could do it right now for any solution and just go through where are all the problem areas and what would happen to the system if it failed. So I found this cool kind of exercise that you could do as a team, right? So you get your team together. You give one of the assignments to be the project manager. You break the team into little groups. Project manager comes out and says, "Hey, our system failed." And they go, "Oh man, how did it fail?" Right? And they go, the project manager goes, "I'm not telling you. You as your team go and figure out all the ways it could fail and come back to me and we'll discuss it and I'll tell you which thing actually failed." So the team goes away and they're like, "Oh, well, how could it fail?" "Well, we could lose power. The database could crash. The firewall could break. The certificate could expire. The user IDs could not work." And just the list can be just everything is acceptable in this list, right? So you come up with all the ways it can work. I like to do this personally with kind of data flow diagrams, and you just point at something on the diagram and say, "That broke. How would the system work?" Team comes back and you analyze all the ways it could break, and then you do a thought exercise on what would happen if that broke, and how would the system still work? Would a DR kick in? Would the servers roll over? Yada yada yada. Right? Do I have a process? Is this even a realistic situation that I need to adapt to? So I love a good pre-mortem as a way to do kind of preventative maintenance on your system. All right. If I had done a pre-mortem on my castle trip, I would have found my issue sooner. And instead of my mission failing, mission success. So I should eat my own dog food sometime. All right. We could also do what I call an advanced pre-mortem, which is a concept called chaos engineering. Tom and I have talked about this. This is an idea that Netflix either came up with or stole from somebody else. They at least popularized it. The idea with chaos engineering is you actually execute those scenarios, right? So if one of your scenarios is 4 web servers go down, then you actually go out and you turn 4 web servers off and you see what happens. If your scenario is the server crashes, you go into the data center and you unplug the server, or you turn off the VM or whatever, right? And then you see how resilient your system is, right? Netflix actually does this in production, right? We are not going to do that. Don't tell my boss that I said we're going to turn off stuff in production. But I think it's an exercise we could do in a lower environment where we could just take say a Maximo setup and be like, what happens when I unplug some of the app servers, right? And is our system resilient enough to handle that? So that's chaos engineering, a really cool concept that hopefully we can figure out a way to bring into Encore, not in production, probably. All right, number 8, CalPath. CalPath is something where when I was doing the CCB project, Charles Vincent kept referencing that a lot of the ways we were doing things is following the CalPath, which is, I've never worked on a farm with cows. My dad has, but what I get is the idea is cows will walk along a path and then create a path in the grass or the field or whatever. And you kind of be like, oh, that's where all the cows went. The way he was referencing it was the same cow does the same path all day long. Well, when I looked it up, it's really, there's a head cow and all the other cows follow that cow. So it's really a follow the leader kind of scenario, right? The way he was referencing it was, oh, we need to fix this because the old cow path is super inefficient. Let's create a new cow path, right? So this was an image I pulled off of the internet. As you can see, okay, why would the cow do all this when it could just do a straight line, right? And back then, in my young days, I was like, that's a good point. We should just fix everyone's old cow path and make a new cow path. I kind of changed my mind on that, and I think it's situation dependent, right? What we don't know is maybe the cow made that path because there's dangers in the other path, or when it rains, it gets muddy, or there's annoying birds, or I don't know, right? So I think it's an evolution of something, and so is following a cow path bad, right? Maybe all the cows are just following the 99-1 rule we talked about at the top. Maybe the one cow just decided to go that way and they all followed him. Hopefully that cow's the smartest cow. Maybe he knows what he's doing and we're all good. Maybe that cow's a moron and we shouldn't follow that cow, right? We talked about picking the right tool, pick the right route. I think in this scenario, right, we got to figure out let's not just assume the old path is bad. Let's validate that path is bad, because maybe the new path comes with exponential cost, because we didn't realize that when we build that new path, all the things that the old cow knew about we are now learning ourselves, right? So I've changed it to, I really think there's two scenarios here that we need to evaluate when we're dealing with any kind of situation like this is, if the old path is good, then let's make that path better. Let's pave the path, let's harden it, let's make it more efficient, and let's embrace that, making that path better and not trying to get rid of it. Or if that path is bad, then yeah, let's find a new path and go from there. So if you ever hear me say cow path, that's what I'm talking about. Also, no cows were damaged in this scenario. All right, listening is a skill. All right, I'm about to hit some of y'all in the room with this one. Andre's pet peeve number 1, people on laptops during a meeting. Okay, if you're on a laptop during a meeting, there's a somewhat % chance you are not paying attention to the person that is talking. You may be reading emails, you may be working on your presentation for Innovation Week, you may be taking notes and you're actively listening. It's hard for me to know. I'm a fan of the no laptop policy. If we want to enable that, that would be fantastic. Also probably depends on the meeting. If you're doing some kind of like design session, like God bless. But if you're supposed to be paying attention and you're staring at your laptop, if you're on WebEx, who knows if you're paying attention? You know, it's hard to tell. Andre's pet peeve number 2, people asking questions on slide 1 of a presentation that will likely be answered on slide 3. Okay. I spent a lot of time on this deck. There's 60 slides. I went through the thought process of hopefully all questions will be answered. Obviously not all questions will be answered. I want you to ask questions, but maybe not on the first slide. Ask the first question that comes to your mind. Right? Pet peeve number 2. I only have 2 pet peeves. But if we get back to listening, and I think at Christina's panel, they talked about listening a few times. Listening is supposedly the most used skill. I don't know what that means, but I like it. It's really important. Listening is better than reading, speaking, and writing for cognitive remembrance, right? It takes practice to actively listen, right? And we'll talk about it. Hearing is different than listening. I myself have a hard time with this. This is why I don't read anyone's emails, is because in a meeting, I have to give you all my focus or my brain goes away and I don't know what you're saying, right? So if you want to get the information that that person is giving you, you have to actively participate. Listening is a skill, right? Because you may hear it. Hearing is the words going in your mouth, right? But if you're not actively listening, then you're not understanding what they're saying. You're not evaluating what they're saying. Do I understand it? If you've ever talked to me in person, I often nod my head while you're talking. Some people think I'm trying to hurry you up. That is me acknowledging in my brain that I understand what you're saying. That is me doing number 2. I understand what you're saying. And then once you understand it, then you can judge, is this information good or bad? If you're listening to these, you might be like, that idea is terrible. This idea is good. That idea is terrible, right? You can't do that if your also brain is halfway somewhere else. Okay? So just to reiterate, hearing is a physical process. It is very passive. I did this in college where I just went to the class and I was like, hopefully that stuff's going in there and maybe it'll come out when the test comes. But to actually listen is a mental process. It is active. It is a learned skill and it is hard. Even when you want to listen, you can come in. Okay. So anyway, hopefully Kennedy, while looking at her laptop, is actively participating in what I'm saying. We'll do a test later. Kennedy, here's some recommendations for how to actively listen. One of them is eye contact. 2 is stay objective. As you're listening, right, I may have 8 ideas or 12 ideas, right? You may say the first 2 are crap, I give up. You know, give the person some leeway. Maybe they'll come around to you. So stay objective. Don't immediately discount the person, right? Ask mental questions as you're going. It'll help you with whether or not you think you understand it or not. Look like a listener. At least pretend to listen. You know, Christina. It's okay. And don't interrupt. No one's interrupted me so far except for name a forest lady over there. But and then the last 3 I really didn't like, but I couldn't find a better slide. All right. Josh, we having fun yet?
Absolutely.
You should know that my WebEx blew the moment that you called me out. So, Christina, get ready.
Somebody's listening.
Yes, you have active participation on the WebEx.
Like I said, maybe I should have done that as cookie number 1. All right, this is one of my favorite ones. This one's real short. I can't remember who gave me this idea. Probably
Maybe you'll like what I'm doing.
Okay.
I'm going on, I'm getting, my credentials to log in through my phone for an urgent JIRA ticket. The
There you
thing
go.
you don't want.
Hopefully that's a priority for you. If that's a priority and you're using your time right.
Yes, it is.
then God
Yes,
bless.
it is. It's not though.
All right, free tuition. This builds off of the concept of failure is a great teacher, right? The best way to learn things a lot of times is to fail. And if you fail and you learn from something, that is a good thing. That is not a negative thing. So the idea is, how do you take failure and make it a positive mental thing in your head, right? So this is a tip. Treat every failure or mistake or bad decision that you make as free tuition of life, right? You may not, no one had to teach you that. You didn't have to pay for that. You didn't have to go to a course. You didn't even have to listen to my cookie talk. Every mistake you make, learn from that, and that is free tuition from life, right? So go ahead. It's okay to fail. That's how you will learn. And then treat that as a positive. Obviously not at work, do everything at work correctly, but everything else, feel free to make mistakes sometimes, especially for your kids. Let them make mistakes. That's how you learn. And it's free. Failure's free. So free tuition. Keep that with you if you want. All right, we're almost done, guys, I promise. Smaller, more frequent. This is an obvious one. How do you need an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time. Everyone's heard this, but really the reality of what this means is a big problem is daunting. How do you come up with 12 different ideas to talk about in a session, right? You do them over time, right? So have you ever heard of agile development or sprints, right? Where did the concept of agile and development, where did sprints come from? Right? It came from us morons back in the day doing something called waterfall development. Okay? Waterfall development, for you guys that don't know, in the technology world, was we would meet with the functional users, get all the requirements, write it all down in a huge Word doc, review it, they would sign off, and then we would say sayonara, and then we would code it, we would design it, we would code it, we'd unit test it, we'd system test it, we would integration test it, we'd performance test it, we might user test it, and then we would go into production and we'd bring the users back. We'd be like, what do you think of what we built for you? If anyone experienced that time, it was painful because they would be like, this is all wrong, right? And if you go back to exponential cost of the defect, now it's really expensive for us to fix whatever we did wrong. We didn't bring you in, right? So agile development came up with this concept of do a little bit of work, show it to somebody, do a little bit of work, show it to somebody, do a little bit of work. So you're getting that constant feedback, right? So part of that is a small change is easier to test, and it's also easier to identify the cause of the failure, right? So if I'm changing my diet and I decide that instead of my clean eating, I'm going to introduce Mountain Dew every day, and I gain 10 pounds by the end of the week, what was the cause of my gaining that weight? That was the only thing I changed, right? It's pretty obvious what caused that change. If instead I changed my whole diet and I added Mountain Dew, but I exercised, but I slept a lot, but I did this, and I gained 20 pounds. Okay, what was the cause? It was one of these 8 things. Who knows, right? So in life, but really in technology, smaller, more frequent is always a good concept to follow. This goes to communication with somebody, right? Don't come up with something and then tell them a bunch later. It's better to tell them quicker in smaller doses, even if you don't have the answer, right? Perfection is the enemy of the good or whatever, right? You may not have the answer, but it may be better to give them half an answer than the whole answer 10 months later or whatever, right? So smaller, more frequent. That's cookie 11. Cookie number 12, we're going to end with pluralistic ignorance. This is the idea that if you're in a large community and you don't understand what's going on, or you feel like you're not getting it, but everyone else seems fine, and you just go along with it, right? But it may be that the whole crew is like, what is going on? I'm completely lost. No one raises their hand. No one says anything. We all go down this path, right? Maybe we all want to go to lunch. We go to the same place every week, but everyone hates it. I worked at this job where we went to Chipotle twice a week. It drove me crazy. I got so sick of it, I can't eat it to this day. But nobody said anything. We just went to Chipotle twice a week. It was really painful, right? This is a good one I found, 1979. So nothing has changed in the world, right? 1979. This guy's like, everyone good with this idea? They all go, yeah, hey, great. And in their heads, they're like, say it ain't so. You got to be kidding me. Heaven forbid, which I think is cursing in 1979. No, 1,000 times no, right? So I'm sure we've all been in situations where we're like, man, this is insane, but everyone else seems good with it, and we all go along with it. So just be okay. Maybe you don't even have to do it in the whole group. Go to somebody that's leading the thing. Hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Please explain to me why this is a good idea. And either that person will be like, oh, it's a terrible idea. I don't know why we do it. And maybe you change the behavior. Or he says, or she says, here's why. And now you've learned why. And now you have the knowledge of like, oh, this does make sense. Or we're doing it for no reason and I'm just gonna go along with it, right? Either one. But at least, think about that. If you're in something where you're like, this doesn't make sense to me and it's probably causing everybody pain, you could be the hero potentially. So here's a bunch of words. This is where I violated my presentation deck. So you can read this later if you want. All right. So I'm going to finalize with this. I'm going to try to tie it all back to the beginning. What potentially contributes to pluralistic ignorance? The 99-1 rule. We don't have enough 1% that are brave enough to say, I think we should change this. Okay. Okay. That was all 12. Here's the list. Any questions, any thoughts? Anybody got their own knowledge cookies they want to share? I'm done.
Do you have anything coming in on the chat?
I don't have any idea.
We'll get a cannon again.
What's your favorite cookie? Of your 12?
My personal favorite cookie? I like the exponential cost of the defect, which I think is just a valid point. I think the pre-mortem is a cool exercise. But I think priority versus time can be the most impactful. And I like free tuition as a concept of just letting it be okay for you not to do something right. All right, that was it. Thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully one of the 12 resonated.
Hit the theme, Kennedy.
All right, thanks.